blessed are the truly committed to change the world, because they shall inherit the earth. It's great to see you all here. It's a pleasure to welcome back Earl Phalen to Harvard. He is a graduate of our law school and has been a guest speaker to our school many times. And before the law school, he went to that little school in New Haven, where he did his undergraduate. But Earl Phalen is a very successful education entrepreneur, someone who, while he was still a student at the law school, began an after-school program to serve low-income minority children that had 20 students at first, and then grew to serve, was it 15,000? 15,000 students, building educated leaders for life, now Summer Advantage USA. And then he created two other organizations, one of which he currently is the CEO of, you're still CEO of,
yes.
The George and Veronica Phalen Leadership Academy, a charter network and turnaround school, network of schools named after his parents. And he's also the CEO of an organization you did not find. What is it called? Great Jobs KC, which is a top scholarship, a college scholarship and workforce development program that will deliver this year. How is it? 50,000? How many people? What's the scale of that program?
10,000 this year, but 50,000 over the next 5 years.
50,000 will serve 50,000 people in the next 5 years. Bottom line is, Earl has done a lot and knows a lot about how to build organizations that build human capacity, that build talent, and has actually turned those lessons into a new book, which is what we're talking about. It's the topic of our conversation, a book that will be released in June. And it's From Vision to Impact. It's a very readable book. I recommend it to all of you who are here, who are watching this. And it's a book that has basically the 7 building blocks of success in building an educational enterprise. So welcome to the Ed School. It's great to have you back.
Thank you.
And I look forward to this conversation. So let me start with the obvious, Earl. You have a very busy life. You're leading 2 large organizations. I'm sure you are not looking for more things to do. Why did you decide to write this book?
Well, I was recruited to join the Kauffman Foundation board out in Kansas City. They're a $3 billion foundation. And one of the first things that was handed to us when we joined the Kauffman Foundation board was Mr. Kauffman's bio. And I just thought, wow, what a great way. Mr. Kauffman passed away 30 years ago now, but what a great way to keep alive who he is, what he values, what he was trying to do in community with both his business that had incredible success in philanthropy. And so for my charter school nonprofit, we have about 1,400 employees. And I said, what if I wrote a autobiography that allowed folks, my mom and dad are no longer alive, but allowed folks to get a sense of who my mom and dad were, what their values were, and then what I was trying to do in building the organization. Wouldn't that be wonderful for 50 years from now, 100 years from now, for folks, if PLA is still around, to get this as part of their onboarding process the same way I did. And I loved the process of writing a book. And so some of my friends encouraged me to write another one and said, hey, this book should be focused on what you've learned through your entrepreneurial journey. And I made a ton of mistakes from my first nonprofit probably till earlier today. But if you could capture some of those lessons and share those with other entrepreneurs, wouldn't that be powerful? So I decided to write the book.
So this book has these basically 7 building blocks. You want to tell us what they are? These are the 7 building blocks to building a successful educational enterprise.
Yeah, and I told you I didn't do my homework and reread my book.
I can tell you what they are.
Quizzing me in a way but I know it begins with starting with why.
Yeah,
and I know it's that talent matters, right?
That's
down
right.
to people.
That's
I
right.
know that piece matters. I know having a strong business model
you got it.
is part of the core as well. I know that I've learned a lot about how you support implement operating mechanisms that allow you to have consistently strong results given the goals that you have as an organization and individually. And then I'm sure there are a few other great chapters in there as well.
A good financial engine, build a culture that empowers the team, and maintaining faith. Let me begin with that, because some of these chapters talk about things. The prose is very engaging, and the way in which you weave your own experiences, your insights with things that exist in other books is actually makes it very readable and very useful. But some of the things I have not encountered in others, and that's chapter 7, managing your emotions to drive yourself to the work. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, we were having a discussion between class, and when I founded my first nonprofit, Bell, there were a lot of things that I was not good at, and fundraising was one of them. And not only was I not good at it, there were things that I did not want to do. And so I planted a fundamental, I love history and I love seeing what sacrifices have been made for all of us to have the opportunities today that maybe didn't exist 100 years ago or 20 years ago. And I planted a fundamental question in my head, which is, at that point, we were just serving Black children. Now we're much broader. But I said, what am I willing to do for Black children? And my answer was, I'm willing to die for Black children. So anytime I would start to, in my mind, fuss and fret, I didn't want to fundraise, I didn't want to do this, I was nervous about, I would just say, hey, Earl, what are you willing to do? And I'd say, yeah, I'm willing to die for my children. And if the activity I was going to take was anything less than dying, then I'd get my mindset right and try to be successful in doing that. And obviously everything that I've encountered is less painful, at least to me, than dying. So I've been able to, I planted that piece. And that fundamental question ties to my faith, which is I believe that that this work is hard. It can sometimes be isolating, but at its core, it is beautiful, and it is rejuvenating. It is energizing. Anytime I'm with my scholars, I leave there just ready to run harder. I actually usually feel bad that I haven't done more for my children to make our communities better places and safer places, more nurturing places for them. And so for me, that foundation of faith is, I believe I found my calling. I believe I know why I was put here on earth, and that's to help other people be their best selves. And when I mentally go to a place that isn't productive, then I just need to ground myself in essentially stop complaining. Figure out how you can do this exceptionally well, and you owe this as a service to your scholars and families. And for some of those who weren't in the first session, the short version of my journey was teen mom foster care at a time that 70% of foster care children, Black boys in Massachusetts foster care, ended up in the penal system. And my journey was Yale University, Harvard Law School, and being able to do this incredible work for the last 30 plus years. And so, but for the faith of others, I don't sit here today, and I don't have the opportunities that I've been blessed to have. So I try to pass it forward in that way.
One of the chapters that I also found very interesting is this chapter where he says, make sure that you build a culture that is mostly about solving problems.
Yeah.
So what else could it be about? And what you do that is different in your organizations that allows people to stay focused on problem solving?
Yeah, we some people like this culture and some people don't. But, in my early nonprofit leadership days, I found that we'd set very ambitious goals for fundraising. We'd set ambitious goals for service and the quality of programming and the educational outcomes that our children had. We adopted very early on the balanced scorecard tool to help us make sure we're looking holistically at process and financial health and team members, and then obviously our scholars, our customers, and our families. But we'd kind of go through the year, we'd have meetings, but I'd be, watching the Patriots back when the Patriots used to be pretty good, and I'd be watching the Patriots games, and I'd create the agenda that my senior leadership team was going to discuss for the week. And, and we didn't look at a dashboard on a regular basis, and we didn't take time every quarter to have people report on how are you doing against these 5 critical goals, and what feedback can your peers give you to help you break through something and help solve a particular piece. So about 7 years ago, we adopted these operating mechanisms, and Death by Meeting is kind of the book, but then some would call it the Rockefeller habits or whatever term. But essentially, it was a very structured process that we have our balanced scorecard. Every team member knows what their 3 to 5 goals are. We have a daily huddle. It's real quick. It's, hey, one of my goals is to raise, $5 million. I'm $1 million towards the most important thing I'm going to do today. Here's what I said I was going to do yesterday, and I didn't quite finish it. So, we have weekly tacticals. We have one-on-ones, but the one-on-ones are different, right? You're submitting your one-on-one form, and at the top 5 are your 5 goals and your progress towards goals and what your priorities are. And then the monthly strategy piece, because we say, hey, if you can take a 2-hour block and take 1 or 2 topics and solve 6, 8, 10 strategic topics in a year, wow, that's going to be good progress for the organization. And kind of every meeting has a who, what, when at the end, and we revisit the who, what, when the next time we get together. So we just tried to add operating mechanisms, whatever process, but nobody's confused about where they stand against goals. Nobody or everybody has a chance to lean on their team members to get help if they're struggling with a particular thing that maybe somebody else has already broken through on. And it's not punitive. It's just we want that level of clarity because our community deserves it. The mission that we're trying to uphold deserves that focus on excellence. Some people feel like it's, somebody said, you guys are corporatizing the nonprofit sector. And I said, well, if accountability is a bad thing, then this isn't the right culture for you. And I wasn't saying it to be rude. It's just you can go somewhere else and have a little bit less of that structure. But if impact is what really drives you, then you should see this as a benefit.
Tell us, what do you think leaders can do to stay connected with the people they try to serve? I have the privilege of serving on the board of PLA. And I remember the very same week that COVID was declared a pandemic, how impressed I was. You called some kind of an emergency meeting of the board. And your first concern was how to make sure we get food to the children, because one of the services that they received was food. And as they had to go home, we could get to the learning packages, but you had to think about that need. And my understanding is that you were first in front of the line of your staff, finding a way to deliver food to the kids. So what do you do that for yourself, and what do you think more generally leaders can do to stay in touch with those that they're trying to serve so they know what the needs are, especially when the context changes on them in ways that can be fast, such as in COVID?
Yeah, I mean, I think I've been blessed to be in service. PLA has been around for 10 years now. So I've been blessed to be in service and build relationships with my regional directors, with my principals, and they will speak the truth to me. Mm-hmm. So it wasn't my idea, it was their idea of Earl. We're going to have a hunger issue if we don't. The second thing was, Earl, we're going to have a social piece if kids are forced to be at home 24 hours a day. Some of our scholars' living situations are really tough, and they're not healthy situations. So, and then it was academics third, right? Was sort of the order in which my team told me. So I think part of it is, do you build trust to have authentic conversations? I think, I shared during the class before, I coached basketball for several years. So for 4 months, I'm in the school 5 days a week, and I'm getting there early, and I'm at lunch with our scholars and sitting at the lunch table. So you're with the scholars, you're on the bus going to games and practices. They'll tell you what they think is good about the school and what they think needs to be improved. So being able to be present as well. We've done a lot better job in KC Scholars and now at PLA, and also understanding, we've tried to, and you can't get everything down to this, but we've tried to understand on a day-to-day basis, are we on track to achieve our goals? So knowing that your key performance indicators and building a structure and a system, we haven't used Salesforce, but whatever, but using a structure and a system allows you to look at, and that gives you honest. And then when you start to focus your meetings on, we're going to start with, let's just look at the data. How do we feel about our scholars' growth? When we go into schools, our schools in Detroit, only 3% of our kids were proficient. So 97% of the kids we were serving could not read or write or compute on grade level. And as you go up, the middle schoolers were at about a third grade level, right? So 4 years below grade level. And our high schoolers were 5 and 6 years below grade level. So you have to have a focus that can't be, it's just the state test proficiency. It has to be growth, right? It has to be, are we getting 1.5 years growth? Are we getting 2 years growth? How do we know, okay, great. Now we're getting that in this classroom, but we're not getting it here. What are we going to do about it? So I think the ability to listen, to be proximate, and to build trust, and then have systems that you actually look at. Because we had systems for a while, we just didn't look at them as part of, no, we're looking at this data every single day, and we're going to be honest. We got a culture survey at KC Scholars. We had a lot of things that, so KC Scholars is scholarship organization for young people, but also workforce development. If you're 17 or older and making under $45,000, we'll help you get training, we'll help you get employed, and we'll help you keep that job. And we're trying to get folks to jobs $45,000 to $125,000 a year. And we've had 5,000 people. We launched it last year. We've already had over 5,000 people join the program, and several thousand are in much better jobs, and they have health benefits for themselves and their families. But we got a cultural survey that said only 67% of the team members felt like they liked the culture. So we're going to stop with our team and say, hey, what's one thing we could do better? What's one thing that you could do differently to help us improve this culture? Because we want to be 80, 90% people liking the culture. And some people who've told me, it feels corporate. This might not be the right fit, and we can gracefully part ways and support them in their next journey. But for a lot of the culture piece, it's not the accountability. There's something else going on. And so we just got that survey back last week and discussed it at our staff meeting openly and said, hey, we're going to figure this out. We're going to look right at it and figure out what we can do to make the culture better here.
Earl, I want to ask you two more questions, and then I want to open it up to you. So you've been working for over 3 decades now, almost 4.
Yes.
In different ways, providing opportunities to educate children in poverty. Children in poverty, as you just mentioned, when you talked about the pandemic, live in a context where there are many other challenges that they face other than the challenges of their schools. So talk to us about supporting the education of children in poverty and the complexity and the interdependence of all the different forces, and how do we do it? And is it enough to try to improve their schools? How do we change their ecology and not just the schools? What have you learned about that? And if there was one thing that you could change, either in how governments work or how funders work or how entrepreneurs work, what would it be?
Yeah. I mean, I think I knew it intellectually, but I think I've learned about the complexity and the intensity of poverty. And on both the physical spirit, on the mental spirit. I mean, I have some of the toughest kids. I mean, when the book of Grit came out, I sort of laughed because I was like, you have no idea what our kids go through. Like, my kids don't need grit. Like, the stuff that they go through on a day-to-day basis would break most of us. Like, literally would break most of us. And I said, no, my kids they have grit. But back to your question, when George Floyd was murdered, we launched our workforce development program as our response. And my team said, you got to put something on the website, you got to write a letter. And I said, hey, I don't have any statement about people who posted a letter. That just doesn't touch my spirit. That's not what I want to do as a response to this. And having watched it like 109 times on the news, it was really very upsetting. And so we decided to create economic mobility for our families as a response to, and some would say, well, that's not really connected. And I would say, well, economic stability, political power, education, those things can lead to more responsive, quote unquote, police forces. And so we launched that program as a result of that piece, because we felt like the family's economic instability was making the journey much harder. We had our first class president was so he came to us in 8th grade. He went to a different school, and he's big kid, real big kid, like not tall, but like 5'10", but built like a house. And he said he went to high school to smoke weed, flirt with girls, and fight. Those were the 3 reasons he went to school from kindergarten through 8th. And he joined us, and my principal and dean basically said, if you want to do that, God bless you, you're just not going to do it here. And if you have 2 younger brothers and sisters, and his mom's a prostitute and addicted to drugs, if you want to change the future of yourself and your brothers and sisters, we will help you. We'll give you everything we have to do that. And so he went home, and he tells the story. He went home, slept on it, and came back next day and said, I'm going to be different. And so became the class president, 3.2 GPA, now at Indiana University, Bloomington, with a 3.4. And I share that for two reasons. One is this boy's first bed was when he showed up for freshman year. It was the first time he had a bed. He'd been homeless the entire journey, in cars, on the couch, X, Y, or Z. So when you think about education, you have to contextualize it in. A lot of our kids are going through a lot of stuff, and a lot of kids everywhere, rich communities, poor communities, middle, are going through a lot of stuff. Our kids are going through a lot of stuff. And so the approach has to be as intense as, and we think kind of a family-based approach that gives hope. Because a lot of the in Kansas City, I'm sorry for being long-winded, but a lot of the kids in Kansas City who are 14, 15, and 17 in Indianapolis, and because I coach them, I know them, and so they just relate. But I also know what some of them do outside of school, and they're incredibly violent. And they feel a hopelessness. They feel that we have, as adults, have completely failed them, that we have left them unsafe. And if we don't give an F about them, then they don't give an F about anybody else. And that is sort of their mindset, right? And so when you kind of understand the anger and the hurt and the scared or the frightened young person who kind of has to find a way to navigate, you then kind of understand this has to be more holistic. When you go to our schools, the kids don't, like literally we've had 2 fights in a middle high school in 5 years. Because the kids understand this actually is one place where we don't. And when the new class of 7th graders come in, and middle schoolers are a unique set of human beings, but when they come in, like all the seniors and juniors are like, those kids are such jerks. Like, how can we get rid of them? Can we kick them out? We're like, well, you were the same way. So you got to help them, this is that. But the scholars are yearning for that safe, loving, supportive place where they can kind of have joy and not have to be on the defensive and have to be hard. And so we try to provide that. And then for their families, we're trying to make sure that they get the economic piece, that if they want to stay on the Far East Side or they want to stay where we are at 8 Mile in Detroit or wherever in Montgomery, they can do that. But if they don't want to, they also have the ability to do that as well.
I'm about ready to open it up. I now realize that we had made a plan, which I forgot, which was that you were going to make opening remarks.
Okay.
Do you want to make them?
No,
or are we
I've
cool?
talked enough.
All right, so let's open it up to your comments. Yeah, go ahead.
Hi there.
I'm so sorry for leaving just a few minutes.
That's okay.
I'd love to hear you talk about the tension between, if there was tension for you, about starting something new versus trying to help improve what already exists. And this sort of like, I don't know, this push and pull between education and entrepreneurship and really thinking about the system of public education that exists.
Yeah, I haven't faced that, or I haven't felt that tension in a while, but when we started Bell, that's what folks said. They said, this is ridiculous. There are mentoring programs out there. There are also tutoring programs out there. Why are you taking your energy to create this whole new enterprise as opposed to, and again, I was younger and I was definitely more naive and kind of said, yeah, but what we're trying to do, you don't even understand. We're trying to take Black students from all these campuses and bring them into Roxbury, Dorchester, and Mattapan, because we know the psychological piece of if you don't even believe you have a prayer of achieving greatness, then you won't put in the effort, right, to achieve it. And we need our young people, yes, we're tutoring, yes, we're mentoring. We need our young people to see that there are hundreds of incredibly positive Black role models on, the 20 university campuses here, and we need to get them to get to know us, like not just, we came and guest spoke, but to get to know us, like know who we are, know that we have fears. I mean, when we were at Agassiz, we were all a little bit on edge because exam time was coming up, and the kids like, you get nervous about exams? Like, you're a 20-year-old grown man. Like, how are you nervous? I'm like, yeah, I'm really nervous about it. But that level of connectivity, then it starts to kind of open our scholars up to, okay, wait a second, I can go to BC, Tufts, Brown, or what have you. Okay, it's okay for me to be nervous before a test because these guys are doing pretty well and they're getting nervous. And so back to your question, I felt like we were trying to do something different, but a lot of people said it's not that different. What you're doing is not that different. If I look back today, should we have joined the Boys and Girls Club and tried to move them? I wouldn't do it personally. But it doesn't mean it's a wrong decision. But me personally, I wouldn't do it because I thought they were doing incredible work. I didn't think that they were doing what we were trying to do, which was trying to change the psyche of young people as it relates to them. When we called our kids scholars, somebody got mad at me. I said, why are you calling these kids scholars? Yeah. I said, well, because I want them to understand in a world that says, at least in that point, maybe still today, questions Black intellectual ability, calling a child a second grader who's 2 years below grade level a scholar is really significant to us, right? And so we were calling scholars in 1989, right? And we were pushing things like that we took all of our kids on a college campus every summer. Kindergartners. We're like, yeah, because when I was young, I went to Williams College because my brothers went there, and we went up to visit. We went skiing, and I walked to campus, and I felt I belong here. There's nothing special. It's great. The free ice cream and all you can eat food, and the sea is pretty cool, right? Well, I want my kids to have. There was a psychological piece that we were trying to do, but again, your question was, how do we know? But that was just me as an entrepreneur. And I was probably blinded by, there probably were other great organizations that were trying to change the psyche. And if I'd done my homework, I might have found them, but I wouldn't have worked for them.
Yes, Lisa.
I'm really appreciating how focused you are on culture. And as a part of that, the language, right, you just your example here on students of scholar. Can you speak, because what I hear often in elementary classrooms is deficit language.
Yes.
Right, and especially towards young boys, or I've just experienced that.
Yeah.
So I wonder how you help your teachers, your mentors, how you help them with the language that is not deficit. How do you work on that part of your culture?
Yeah. One of the blessings of being an organization led by me, Black man, and having a lot of individuals of all races who are culturally aligned, right? My team is very diverse, but we all believe deeply in the innate genius within our scholars and within all children. Because we have that comes through in just how we approach everything, right? I mean, I shared the example before, and some people, when kids come into class, hey, come on, pick your head up, and we don't do that. Hey, Fernando always has a joyful spirit. He's always had, Fernando, hey, stay out here for a second. I want to talk to you. So these are the good news of, we're probably over my 1,400 staff. It's, 55% Black and probably 37% white and 10%, 13% other. But we have people, these are our brothers and sisters. So you wouldn't ever talk to your younger brother and sister in a deficit. You may say you're being a knucklehead and you need to knock off that behavior because that's not up to who you are, but you wouldn't say you don't have the ability to do X, Y, Z. Like you wouldn't do that to somebody you loved. So I think that the notion of, if you walk into our campuses, you will feel love, and these are our younger brothers and sisters, and we know what they're capable of doing. And I say that on a part, we know what they can do. And then we try to, one of the things that was best about, so I went to Norwood High School, public high school. In my, when I was a junior, it was Ingrid Tucker, me, then Eric Smoot. She was a senior, I was a junior, and and we were the three Black kids in the school, right? And so outside of kind of some things my family did, you could leave. I left there, even with my family support. You can leave that environment really thinking very bad about yourself as a Black male or as a person of color. And it wasn't until kind of I got on Yale's campus and I started talking to my friends. They're like, "Where did you get that stupid belief?" And I was like, "Oh, okay." oh, well, maybe affirmative action did help me. And my friends are like, there are more legacy students walking around Yale than there are affirmative action students. What are you talking about? Oh, okay. Well, what's a legacy, right? So we try to also make sure we're teaching history to our scholars so they understand. I didn't start to really pick up history until like my junior year. And I'm like, oh, the traffic light? Garrett Morgan? Oh, wait a second. Blood plasma? Charles Drew? Oh, wait a second. Tuskegee Airmen? They fought fights that nobody would, wait a second. And so then all of a sudden you start to, wait a second, well, where is Egypt? And what continents does that rest on? And there's some pretty big things that were, okay. So when you start to then know history, that doesn't take away from anybody else's history. But when you start to know history, you start to not just believe what maybe somebody tells you who you are or who you possibly can be. And so that comes through as well, because we do teach history. We start to teach our kids history at a young age to feel good about inventors and scientists and firsts, and because you can do this great stuff too. So all those things I think help build our culture.
Yep.
Really appreciate your comments. I was also struck, just building on that question, that you have a very deep commitment to people and culture, and driven very, very much by values.
Yes.
If I heard you correct, the culture score of your internal team was lower than what you
Yes.
expected. Which is somewhat, how did you react to it? Was it sort of a surprise, given how you operate and what you believe in, that this is almost like the first line of defense? And they're like your brothers and sisters.
Yeah.
You want to really care for them, help them feel it so that they can then pass it on.
Yeah.
And you said that it's not just that we're becoming more corporate, but you said there might be other things that that maybe people may not be feeling that engaged. So just walk us through, how did you feel about that personally, and then also what do you think might be behind some of those scores, and how might you address that?
Yeah. So PLA, great jobs, Casey. PLA culture scores are in the high 90s. KC scholars in the 60s, right? PLA, most of my 1,400 team members are with kids, and they're touching our mission every single day. KC scholars, most of our staff are never with kids, or not kids, but young adults, never touching our mission. And so my original reaction was defensive, but I was by myself. Oh, these guys must have got here, right? I was angry about it. I don't want to have that terrible score. I want people to feel like KC Scholar is a great place, great jobs, is a great place to work. But after, it was very brief. It was, okay, what are we going to do? And I do think the lack of connection with our adult learners is a big part of helping with culture. But we are going to, because the results just came in and we just announced them last week, or actually yesterday, we are going to listen to our team and say, tell us, what's one thing that we're not hearing that could make this culture better? But we are going to hold people accountable to say also, what's one thing maybe you could do, right? So if you think Earl said something that you didn't like at a meeting, or somebody said something you didn't like, do you say it? Hey, I have a question about that. I want to push you a little bit on that. Or do you wait till the meeting's over, go into the parking lot and say, Earl's an idiot, right? Well, that doesn't help. That doesn't help culture. It doesn't help us get honest feedback. And then we've got to make it a safe environment that if somebody does challenge. But I want to hear what the team encourages us to do and what the team says they're willing to do. Because I think our scores, once we integrate that into, we'll do whatever they say, or not 100% of it, but we'll do as much as we can. I think that will help some things, but wide open to other feedback and suggestions of how to make it stronger and stronger.
And 10 years out, what's your dream?
10 years out, I would love for PLA and Great Jobs to have helped 1 million people who are currently unemployed or underemployed get jobs that give them the dignity of taking care of their families and their loved ones, give them the economic means to live where they want to live and provide, and have the benefits that, and by benefits I mean a lot of our families are making ends meet, and if one thing goes wrong, their child falls and breaks an arm at the playground, God forbid, they're now faced with a real economic, do I pay rent? Do I go to the emergency room and pay this? But if a tire goes flat, and I think that takes away so to answer your question, I'd love to have 1 million people who are saying, I am in a much stronger economic place. And once they do that, then I'm going to push them to say, now use your political muscle to get this thing, to help us get this thing right. Because a lot of our folks are disenfranchised. And a lot of our folks, even those who are not showing up on the unemployment, they have lost hope. And they are just not trying to get, and all of a sudden now the number looks like it's 13% unemployment, but it's not. You have thousands of people who literally have no hope that they can get a career that will allow them to take care of their families, and we want to help 1 million people do that. So that would be great success, and want to then push the nation to the same way Jeff. Obviously, Jeff is, he's an icon, Jeff Canada, but the same way he got us to think about holistic, place-based, deep. I would like my organizations to help people say, oh, we can help 100,000 people right in my backyard. In Tulsa, in Oakland, in Roxbury, we can help 100,000 people right here get better economic stability and hopefully they'll lead to better lives. Yes. Oh, I'm sorry.
No, you could.
Hi, my name is Solo.
Yes.
I'm from Nepal. And before coming here, I started a nonprofit to provide scholarship for kids that
Awesome.
children homes,
Awesome.
orphanages, or passed away. I also tried to make that switch of calling them scholars.
Yes.
I was not met with anger, but my board and my team really didn't adapt to it.
Yeah.
That's one thing that my question is, how do you have the students or these kids that are working also have them feel like they're scholars themselves too? Like, were there specific things that you did for them to feel that way? That's my first question. And my second question, there's this thing you mentioned in your book about your board, and I feel like I'm going through that specific struggle. Because my board currently are people that I trust, and my friends, and my family, and I'm feeling like some sort of stagnation into growth.
Yeah.
And then my key issue is trust. And then, like you mentioned, getting professional help, and then have 2 or 3 lines into how you leverage that. But can you explain a little bit more on how you talk about type versus use control? So I was wondering if you could explain how you do that.
Sure. And any part I missed, just remind me. In terms of the board, my first board, Bell, was friends, family, and professors. There was no job description. There was no interview I met with you and said, hey, you want to join the board? Okay, I'm willing to do that. How many meetings do you have for a year? And there's some committee work. Okay, I'm joining. There was no term limits. There was no structure where I looked, does so-and-so have finance? Does so-and-so have growth? Does so-and-so have programmatic? Does so-and-so have the skills set? There was no matrix that we created. And so when you're 7 years in with volunteers and you start to get frustrated with your board, it's kind of hard to say, you know what, I no longer need your service. It's like you're firing a volunteer, but there's no structure around, right? It's just this weird, and these people I looked up to, right? They were mentors and friends. We just weren't being a productive board. And so that's why we brought in the external consultant. I didn't think I could get us home. And then this consultant was like, we're now at a stage of maturity that this organization, because we want the long-term vision to be blah, 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 we now need to have structure. We need to have a process for nominating. We need to have a process, term limits. You can only have 2 consecutive 3-year terms. We need to stagger terms so not everybody's coming off at the same time. They just came in professional. Here's a job description of what a board chair should do. Here's a job description of what a board member is responsible. Hey, at that point, we said we want to be 1, 2, or 3 with your giving, with your philanthropy, right? And so a lot of people looked at it, well, you have your church generally, you have your university, but we wanted to be number 3. And some people opted out. But we kind of set it up in a way that because some of my best board members were like, well, I'm out. And I'm like, no, I need you to stay. We're trying to get these other ones out. And so we kind of had to, jigger the system a little bit. But the purpose was we wanted people who were leaving to not feel like they got fired from something they had volunteered, especially when it's family members and friends and it just can be messy. But I think you could probably say, hey, I'm taking this class, and they really strongly encourage good nonprofits, governance, to have these things in place. And hey, Earl, you've a 1-year term left. You've served 4. I mean 3, and now you have 1 here, you know, so-and-so, you have 2, you could probably do it that way. And I know I still want you all to stay involved. You know, you can even create some advisory type of thing if you really had to. But if you don't have the resources to bring an external, I would say blame it on Fernando. His class is requiring you to do this as part of your, you know, good leadership. So I think that was one part. I now struggle because PLA, my organization, incredible board members, my brother's on the board, one of my best friends is on the board. They give me a lot of freedom and flexibility to run the organization. They're still my governing board, but they give me freedom and flexibility. I come into KC Scholars, one of my top struggles has been like, I don't, like board members say, hey, you did this and you didn't inform us of it. I'm like, oh, yes, we're doing great things. We just raised $50 million. I thought we'd be celebrating, and you thought we should have, you know, so it's been a different, I haven't been tightly managed by anybody my entire professional career, and to come into a system that was trying to tightly manage me, we had some back and forth on, and I think we found a good compromise, but we had some back and forth on, like, if you need to manage me like this, it's not going to work. You set clear goals. We're actually exceeding all of our goals, but their push was we need better communication because it's a small community. We don't want to hear about, okay, so they get a biweekly update. Okay, we need you to do this other thing to see how PLA and KC Scholars fit. So we do kind of a quarterly meeting to show where there's overlap and where there's support. So I've tried to listen, and I think we've found, knock on wood, a pretty good ground now, but it was hard. It was just different for me to be tightly managed because for 30 years I've not been tightly managed. I've been managed, I've been governed, but I haven't been tightly managed and stuff like that. So I prefer loose. But the downside of loose sometimes is if it's a tight management, sometimes with the right structure, you can ask more of that group that's really the management, right? I can't see myself as an employee. I am an employee at KC Scholars, but I don't see myself that way, right? But I've slowed down some of my ideas. I wanted to do this, this, and this. My board wanted to do something different, and so I've kind of slowed down to fit their pace. But sometimes if your board is tightly managing, you can hold them more accountable. Okay, well, I need you to help raise, you as a board have to help me raise $100,000 for this work. You as a board have to do, X, Y, Z, whatever the programmatic stuff that you need to do. But it doesn't always translate into that, because I have a board that's pretty loose with me that produces incredible outcomes and resources for us. So being tightly controlled, at least by the board, doesn't necessarily mean the board is going to do what they're supposed to do as board, which is govern, fiscal oversight, generation of fiscal resources, helping you improve the quality of your program, and then evaluate you as the CEO. So, yes.
Because in that demands more time and energy from your end, how do you decide to evaluate your board again? So that's always been a concern.
Yeah. If there's one thing I would do, I would find from Board Source or somewhere else a good job description of a board chair, and I would find a board chair that you feel confident in, you have a good relationship with, and I'd ask the board chair to own the leadership of the board and the management of the board. And maybe your situation doesn't allow you to do that, but I would be having not you driving the board, but you working with the board chair to drive the board to an agreed upon set of outcomes that the board generates, if that's possible. If that's possible.
With us today.
Yes.
I wanted to kind of take you back to your first 7 years that you referenced.
Yeah.
And I wanted to understand what networks you tapped into, what resources you found when you didn't have the money to
Yeah.
get to them, right? How did you get the guidance that you needed to grow in areas like development and strategy
Yeah.
development, communications, all those things that a new nonprofit needs?
Yeah, I mean, I'd share with the class that we got a grant of $12,500 for our first. That was the total budget for the first year. It was me and Arlene. Arlene took 5, I took 5, and we had $2,500 for pizza, curriculum, and other stuff. Right, that was the first year budget. So the first resource I had to tap into is where am I going to live, right? And so I was like, Mom and Dad, we got this apartment in Newton. I'm going to stay here because I just finished law school and I've been there. I said, I'm going to stay here if that's okay. And if you continue to bring groceries over on Sunday, that would be a great help. So that was the most important network to actually economically be able to stay afloat. The second one was this community, right? The leaders here, I had shared that Bailey Mason, who was head of the Harvard's development office at that time, he taught me how to fundraise. Dr. Peterkin taught me education. Professor Ogletree taught me community engagement. Ruth Batson, who wasn't here, but she was a civil rights leader, she taught me kind of how to really authentically partner with families. And so it just was trying to, it's interesting because I'm much different now, but at that point, if I was in the room with somebody who I thought could help me, I was walking down to the front of the room, I was getting their card, and I was following up with them, right? And it's weird that I'm different now because I probably shouldn't be now that I'm saying it, but I was very much like, I need what you have, and I can either go on a learning journey by myself and make 10 years of mistakes, or I can talk to you and you can cut that time, my learning journey, by 90%, and maybe in a year I'll be significantly better, and maybe in 2 years I'll be pretty good at whatever that said area is. And so that was an important part. And, I referenced my family being a guide to me a lot as well. My older brother, Jimmy, was easier for me to talk to because it was just easy for me to receive stuff from him. So he was a successful banker here in Boston. So I'd go to him as well because I could hear what he was saying to me. And interestingly enough, he oftentimes thinks my ideas are really bad. And whereas my dad, I'd get defensive about it and tell my dad he was wrong. With my brother Jimmy, I look at that as, you're telling me what the risks are. I'm going to write down everything you say. I'm not changing what I'm going to do. But now I hear what you say are the pitfalls. So let me make sure I've addressed 3 or 4 of these pitfalls before going in that direction. So he's not negative. He's very positive. But his critical feedback on my ideas actually pushes me to understand these are the risks if you do this, and you better have a plan to mitigate these risks if you decide to go forward. So those are some of the ways.
Could I, for a moment, just follow up on that question? Because I can see the role that your family had in how you think.
Yes.
And what came to mind as you were speaking is this book that I've mentioned to this class on people who are creative. Originals is the name of the book by Adam Grant. And there is a chapter in this book that talks about the place in the family, birth order, and how that influences how regional people are. The argument is that the younger ones get away with things that the older ones would never get away with. And that when you look at creativity, it's much more likely to come from the Benjamins than from the older one. Do you have any thoughts on that? Do you feel that you got away with a lot of stuff that your siblings were not able to get away with in your family?
I think if my siblings were here, they would strongly agree with that theory and that approach. But you're the youngest, right? So you're going to be spoiled. Your parents are going to give you more flexibility than maybe they would have when they were raising their first. And but yeah, no, I definitely feel like that I was spoiled. And I also think my mom, because of the racial dynamic, right, being the only black child in an all-white family in an all-white town, and there were a lot of racial incidents. Now, don't get me wrong, 90% of my elementary and high school life was phenomenal. It was great. I had incredible friends, good teachers, but don't get me wrong that I didn't run into some real nasty racial stuff. And I think because of that, my mom gave me a lot more, even more leeway than she might have, because she wanted to make sure my esteem was really strong and that I believed that I could do anything, that I deserved anything that I went for. And she gave me, I think, even a longer piece because she recognized that otherwise those dynamics could really crush my spirit. Yeah. Yes, sir.
So I can relate to being David.
Yes.
And also how you navigated like the rational and natural system of the organization. Professor Raymond, thank you for bringing this about. Right now, I'm in the position that you were in your first 7 years.
Yes.
And so the organization that I'm working on, it's really important that we are focused on developing the people who are going to carry out that work.
Yes.
So I'm curious about how you're thinking innovatively about the development and professional insights that you're giving to your team. How are you approaching that work in order to ensure that they're able to carry out?
Yeah, I mean, I share the operating mechanisms, and this may not feel like it's a direct answer, but I actually think it is. Giving individuals the clarity of goals and managing and supporting them in achieving their goals within the organization, to me, is part of the development process, right? Because, well, so if I'm meeting with you weekly and you're trying to raise $5 million and you're stuck at $100,000, my coaching of you, to me, that's the most, that time together of, hey, have you thought about this? Hey, you got to get them to come out and see our program. Hey, how do we get to so-and-so who can get a warm introduction to the CEO of that foundation? That to me is part of the development, because you're going towards something and I'm helping you get there and you're kind of executing it. And then we're coming back and circling back daily and weekly on that. There's more formal programs that we have, particularly for like our principals, where we have a principal in residence program. That there is literally a curriculum, and we kind of have a philosophy that it's 10% of like understanding the science, right? Classroom work. It's 80% doing the experience, i.e. watching somebody who's really good at interacting with an angry parent. You watch them, you debrief. What did you see? This is why I said this is right. Then watch, debrief. Okay, now it's your turn. You do it. I'll watch. We're going to debrief. We just think that and maybe part of it's because of the pace at which we're going, but we just think 80% of the learning, we want it to be because you're in there, either watching somebody really good doing it and getting a chance to discuss it, or you're getting a chance to do it. And then, oh yeah, I should have said this, or I could have done this differently. We just kind of think that experience is a great teacher. But again, you have the science of why, you have the science of how, but you also have the experience and a chance to reflect on, gosh, that didn't go well. What would I do differently next time? Well, that went great. How did you get that parent who was literally ready to come up here and fight you to all of a sudden be giving you a hug at the end of the meeting? So we have formal programs. A lot of my folks who have grown the most have been through the informal coaching and honest feedback and coaching and honest feedback and coaching. And, I had my chief development officer for PLA, and that's $125 million at this point. He was a volunteer. He came out of Harvard Ed School at 20, actually, and couldn't find a job. And so he just volunteered for us as a grant writer. And now he's heading up a, 12-person development team for $120 million annual revenue. That was because he was open to that. There's some people who like, Earl, you're a jerk. And I'm like, giving you honest feedback and authentic feedback to help you get better. My point of view may be wrong, but I'm not being a jerk. If I actually didn't care about you, I just say at the end of the year, you're supposed to raise $5 million, you raise $1 million, we got to part ways. You didn't hit your goal. So, but people have to be open to that. You're welcome. Yes.
When you talk about the trauma that the children have that come in, how do you handle, I understand the culture that you're creating and that can do wonders, right? That can create miracles for children. But how do you, on a one-on-one, handle some of the trauma that the children are coming in with? What kind of services, support systems?
Yeah, it's interesting. We had a boy, Kilianti, who was going to play basketball because there wasn't actually a Mount Carmel church. They had some baskets out back. The nets are down, but there's some baskets out back, and he's going to play basketball. And long story short, he was with a group, and somebody in the group was targeted, and he ended up being shot and killed. And, kind of from headquarters perspective, our original thing is, hey, we need to get social workers in there, this is that. And we did. And my team told me, Earl, that's not who the kids want to talk to. Not one person went to the social work. They don't want to talk to, they want to be in relationship with somebody, and they want to sit with people now who may not have the same training, but that's somebody I trust. That's somebody who's been here for 6 years with me. They've been here, they've known me since third grade, they've known me for the year, but they've been kind to me, and they care about me. That's where we've seen our kids want to go and talk and share and express. So we have family services and we have social workers, we have all that. What we've seen, at least on the ground, is the place that our scholars most want to go is, mine was Mr. Powell, right? Never had him for a teacher, but he just opened his door and just listened to me, and then he'd share his philosophies. And later as an adult, he said, Earl, I heard in the teachers' lounges some of these teachers talking about you, and so that's why I found you, to make sure you knew you had a place with me. Now, that was 40 teachers. There were probably 3 or 4, right? So the vast majority were good teachers who really wanted the best for me. But he heard what the 3 or 4 were saying and said, I need to create a space for you. And so that's why I kind of just, asked you to help me with this. And then all of a sudden you kind of liked me, and it just became a natural, organic. He was the most significant outside of family social force or social emotional support for me. And he was a English teacher who I never had. And so I think that's what our kids are also saying through their journey.
Yes.
So, I want to do something after Huxley. I want to do something in Sanford, Florida, and so I'm very sure that the community is going to play a very important role in how far the kids go, because in my kids' family schools there are a lot of homeless kids.
Yes.
Or people living with their families and all that stuff. So I'm just asking, I wanted to know that do you have any formal or informal linkages with the support organizations in the areas that you work in, because that is also, if it's high poverty levels and all this stuff, and you have kids who do go through trauma. So do you partner with them, or do you do all this on your own? Because there's a lot of emphasis now on community.
Yes. Yeah. We, in both PLA and with Great Jobs, we partner. So in Great Jobs, people are trying to get short-term credentials that lead to careers. They need childcare. We don't provide child. They need housing and utility assistance. We don't. They need support with transportation. We can do some gas cards temporarily, but we can't solve a long-term transportation piece. We do that all through partnership. And in our schools, it's the same way. Again, while we take a mentoring mindset into running our schools, we have social workers, we have Galley Youth Services, and they do kind of family counseling. And so we have those partners because we just don't feel like we can do it all alone.
Hi, good afternoon.
Hi.
My name is Jasmine Fernandez. I'm a second-year doctoral candidate in the Doctor of Education Leadership Program.
Yes.
I'm not in the class. I hope it's okay.
Of course it is.
That's totally fine.
Of course it is.
I already hear. I want to go back to the conversation that you were having about the impact of like individual teachers and the role that it can have on a student's experience.
Yes.
And something I've been really wrestling with is when we continue to build teams that have maybe they're bilingual, but there's a difference with being bicultural and
Yeah.
understanding like
Yeah.
the culture and the lived experiences of the communities that you're serving.
Yes.
And you can also have teachers that don't come from that community and might have good intentions, but good intentions still have psychological harm on our students, on our families, on our staff. I'm wondering if you could speak to a little bit more about how does equity play a role in your hiring and retention and practices, and how you decide to promote people into cabinet that have both the technical experiences, but also the experiences of working in communities and like honoring cultural wealth.
Yeah, I mean, it is, the education sector is significantly challenged right now with talent, right? And more people are leaving or have left after COVID than ever. And so to identify right technical, right cultural is incredibly important and more challenging than it's ever been. And so we've taken, it's not a grow your own, but we've taken sort of a grow your own approach, because we've found that at least within certain positions within the school and at headquarters, that if we don't do that, we find people sometimes with the technical skills but completely devoid of the cultural competency that we expect. And so ours is a longer road because it is and it has to be a willingness to, to the brother's question about development, it has to be a willingness to develop people, because the stretch from being a individual contributor to now you're a manager of individual contributors. That is not the easiest jump, and many of us fail at that jump. And so we try to give experiences that allow folks to begin to demonstrate that they can have that skill, and also be very conscious about it is very different. It's very different to manage 5 people than to you be a great team member on a team of 5. So that's a long-winded way of saying grow your own is our approach. It requires you to be willing to risk putting people into positions before they're ready, where they actually probably don't have the technical expertise, but they do have the cultural piece. And the good news is we're still, we're not small, but we're still small enough that when folks don't align culturally, there's just not a place for them. Like that's a deal breaker for us, because we're serving our kids, we're serving our community. So if you don't love our kids and you don't love our community, maybe you could work in finance and get payables out on time and it's irrelevant. Maybe it's 1 or 2 other places where your love for our kids isn't going to negatively impact. But most of the places it actually does negatively impact, and then obviously we're not going to be able to keep you. Yes.
But how about someone behind you who hasn't spoken yet? And then,
Hi there.
I had a chance to do this class, I had a chance to read the book.
Yes.
And I know you mentioned in your work about the importance of balancing the quantity of the fundraisers
Yeah.
and the rates.
Yes.
So I had a question. Could you speak a little bit about your approaches that you found being most effective or like helpful in your work as you lead these organizations, specifically to ensure that your team can stay on track in tracking the relevant metrics?
Yes.
To make sure that they are aligned with the assumptions that you have in place for the particular business model of an organization.
Yeah, PLA has been around for 10 years, but really more than that, 12. And a lot of people I've worked with for 8, 10, and 12 years. We know how to set goals and use our operating mechanisms to track. And we know that the goal setting isn't kind of a little game where you try to make something really easy and you hope you get away with it. And right, folks understand, but they also understand if they set a stretch goal and don't hit it, it's okay. We're going to reflect on and learn from it, but they at least stretched. At Great Jobs KC, it's very different. We're only in our second cycle of setting goals. The first goals, some of them weren't smart, but I allowed them to because it was folks first getting their hands around it. Some folks used the operating mechanisms, but some didn't. They'd show up to our one-on-one. Oh, they didn't submit their sheet with how they were progressing. Then they'd talk about whatever it is they wanted to talk about. Oh, did you hear that such happened on the news, right? And so they try to run the clock out on the 30 minutes by just talking about stuff that was not related to. And I have to, and I'm still doing it, I showed patience in the first year because I knew it was it felt uncomfortable to folks. But I've let the team know this year our goals are going to be real. They're going to be stretched. They're going to all cascade to our ultimate, what we're trying to do for the community, whether impact or financial health-wise. And there are going to be not consequences in a bad way, but you can't miss 4 out of your 5 goals and expect to be in that same position next year, right? And so to me, particularly since both teams are largely virtual at the headquarters level, all you have is the metrics, and then you have natural mechanisms for feedback, right? Talking to our scholars, going to celebrations, being in schools. You get all those, and then there are some others. But that structure, to me, then allows you to push people, allow them to grow into, because it is a new muscle that they're developing. And that isn't a muscle that everybody's used, right? Come to the daily huddle, tell you what my top priority is for the day. If I can only do one thing, that's a discipline, but it's not. But I give a lot of grace, or I did. This year, I'm going to be pushing us much harder because I feel like, all right, now we're in the second season of running this offense. We should be able to do it. And if we all hit 90% of our goals, what a difference that's going to mean for the community and for the world. So I would just be, as you roll out whatever mechanisms you use, I would have some grace at the beginning that it's going to be clumsy, it's going to be But as long as people are actually authentically trying to do it most of the time, you start to see increased productivity, because it's very hard to wake up every day and be like, well, if I can only do one thing today to help towards this goal, what would it be? Like, that's a hard discipline to do day in and day out, and then actually do that particular thing, right? That's very challenging. So I would show grace in the beginning. Yeah. I think you have the last question.
Just a quick one. I just wanted to find out, in which way are your schools different from other schools?
So we go into failing schools and we turn them around. And so if I told you what are the things that we do, you would probably say, doesn't sound much different. We want a principal who's at 8 out of a 10-point scale or better. Okay, having a good leader. That sounds ingenious, Earl. How long did it take you to think of that one, right? We want our classes to be led by good to great teachers, right? But candidly, the standard then became, well, let's make sure we're 100% staffed on the first day of training, and we staff at 108% because we know there's going to be somebody's going to have a child, somebody's not going to like their supervisor, somebody's going to whatever. Just things happen, so we don't want to have to go and scramble in November to get a teacher. So we overstaff intentionally so that when the inevitable stuff happens, we're not scrambling for a new person who hasn't been trained, who doesn't know our culture and climate, who doesn't know our kids, doesn't know our families, doesn't know our pedagogy. I would say we're I don't know that it's different. We have been blessed to attract a good racial mix, most of whom have the cultural competency we want, not all, unfortunately, and a pretty good, not a great, but a pretty good gender mix as well. And so that's been something that I think has helped us. And then we just have, because of our beginning at Bell and because of our focus on community change, we believe fundamentally parents have to be critical partners, and we structure things to let our parents know you are the most important educator in your child's life, and we're walking beside you. And we want you to be in the school. We want you to talk to us when things are good. We want you to talk to us when you're having challenges, whether it's related to your child's success or your personal stability and success. And so, and we've been blessed. We've gotten 10 schools from F-rated to A-rated, and every one of our other schools has gone up a letter grade. Now, if you look at our proficiency, you'd say your proficiency is still low, and I would say we do turnaround. So you have to focus on growth. And that's why our schools are, A-rated, because their kids are growing year over year. And unfortunately, they've been neglected. And the final thing I say is, of the 50 million children in school here in the U.S., 5 million are going to absolutely abysmal schools that give them no chance, almost no chance is a prayer, but almost no chance of using education to improve their futures. And most, even the best nonprofits in the charter sector are afraid to do turnaround work. And we do turnaround work. That is the core of what we do, because we know those 5 million kids need somebody to step in and make their schools better.
We're about to close. Wouldn't you say that part of what is also distinctive about PLA is that it's an interesting blend of being pretty hard-nosed about the academics, and I see in the meetings the metrics that are kept and how Andra is so focused on performance of schools and so on. We're talking basic literacies, but also at the same time, there is attention to other elements of the development of the kids, right? The big investment in a theater, in a performance place. And I remember the conversations around building that. They were about how these would be valuable for the kids, but also for the community, right? To enrich their lives. And also the athletic facilities and understand. So it's really thinking about the whole child in many, and the family of the child. The creation of PLA University is not about engaging the parents for the benefit of the kids. It's about helping the parents improve their own well-being.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, that program is free to any sibling or any parent of a PLA scholar, and then community members came and said, "Hey, what about us?" We said, "Okay, let's open it up," and it's available to anybody. So as Fernando said, I mean, but But that goes back to when we started Bell, right? Which is we want to, at that point as Black students, we wanted to somehow make the Black community better through our efforts, and now it's all communities, but it's the same approach, which is it's got to be a community, a holistic, piece. If you go back to the Far East Side, you'll see on 42nd and Midhofer, there was 9 acres that we just got donated, and we're knocking down all the trees. And I know it may not seem environmental, but it was not a good environmental area. It was actually a dangerous area. But to put a soccer, football, track for, yes, our scholars, but equally for, because there are no sidewalks on 42nd and Midhofer. So our grandparents, when they walk, they have to walk down the street. Snowy days, they're walking on the street or they're getting their shoes wet, right? Because that's the lack of respect that some of our politicians have for the communities in which we serve. And so this community piece is like, no, now you have a place to go take 4 laps in the morning and go for a walk if you want to, or go jog or whatever it is you do. So I think it is that it's got to be a holistic community approach.
Earl, this was wonderful. Join me in giving him a warm welcome. I encourage you all to read the book.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for that.